flickered through rain-speckled windows as Elias immersed himself in the distorted symphony. The deeper he tuned, the more the voices emerged, snatches of desperate pleas, fragmented memories, and mournful whispers that seemed to seep from a place both alien and achingly familiar. Yet with every breakthrough came a creeping unease. The boundary between signal and mind began to blur. The static seemed to pulse with a life of its own, invading his senses even when the equipment was off. Mara Lynn's visits became more frequent and urgent. Her sharp eyes scanned the chaos of cables and screens, and her tone was firm, yet gentle. "Elias, you're chasing shadows in a storm that's already swallowing you whole," she warned one evening, her voice cutting through the hum of machines. "You can't lose yourself over voices that might just be echoes of your own mind." He looked up, exhaustion lining his face. "But what if they're real, Mara? What if this is the only chance to reach them?" She sighed, placing a steady hand on his arm. "Then we find a way to do it without losing you." Despite her caution, Elias knew he was teetering on the edge. The recordings showed new layers of complexity, patterns within patterns, bursts of clarity amidst the chaos. Dr. Sato's theories gave him hope that the liminal space could be navigated, even controlled. But with every attempt, the storm outside seemed to grow fiercer, as if the city itself resisted his intrusion. Static crackled louder in his headphones, sometimes erupting into spectral voices that whispered directly to him, blurring the line between the trapped realm and his own fragile psyche. One night, as lightning fractured the sky, Elias sat bathed in the blue glow of his monitors. The modified receiver thrummed in his hands, tuned precisely to the frequencies Sato had identified. The static exploded into a chorus of voices, some pleading, others warning, all laden with raw emotion. He closed his eyes, letting the sound wash over him, feeling the pull of a threshold just beyond reach. Suddenly, a sharp crack jolted him back. The equipment flickered, screens flashing erratically. For a heartbeat, the storm outside and the storm within him converged. Elias's fingers trembled over the controls, desperate to hold the fragile connection. A whispered echo floated through the headphones. Cross the threshold, his breath caught. The choice lay before him, to push deeper into the unknown or retreat to safety. The city's electrical storm raged on, an unyielding symphony of chaos and possibility. And Elias Vorn, caught between worlds, prepared to cross the boundaries that had long defined his existence. But as the hum of static swelled around him, a question lingered. Was what awaited beyond the threshold salvation or oblivion? The night stretched on, thick with electricity and unspoken promises, as Elias calibrated his device for the next plunge into the liminal depths, unaware that with each step he took, the silent authority's shadowed gaze drew ever nearer. The thunder rumbled low and relentless outside the grimy windows of my studio, a ceaseless drumbeat beneath the city's electrical storms. The static had grown from a subtle hiss to an overwhelming roar, drowning out the familiar hum of my equipment. Flickering screens cast pale blue light over a mess of wires and tangled cables. It felt like the air itself was charged, heavy with something unseen, something hostile. It started with a subtle shift in the interference patterns, a jagged pulse that sliced through the usual white noise. The signal jammers had found me. Their presence was no longer a distant threat, but a physical assault on every frequency I touched. Each attempt to tune in to the hidden broadcast was met with a harsh, grating distortion that clawed at my sanity. I watched the needles on my monitors twitch erratically, the signals twisting and snapping like a living thing fighting to be heard. The voices, the fragile, desperate whispers I had come to know, were being drowned beneath an ocean of mechanical shrieks and static crashes. It was as if the city itself, or whatever force bent to suppress the truth, was squeezing the air from my lungs. A sudden sharp knock shattered the tense silence. My heart leapt into my throat. The door rattled under repeated pounding. Outside, Muffled voices exchanged clipped commands, accompanied by the unmistakable whir of surveillance drones, hovering just beyond the cracked glass. The silent authority had arrived. I scrambled to shut down my equipment, desperate to erase any trace of my work from their prying eyes and ears. The room seemed to close in on me, the shadows deepening as the storm's fury battered the city streets. I could hear the agent's footsteps, cautious but unyielding, moving closer. "Elias!" Mara's voice sliced through the chaos as she appeared at the back exit, breath coming in sharp bursts. "Get out! They're coming for you." I didn't hesitate. Grabbing my portable recorder and a few essential tools, I slipped through the cramped exit, the cold rain immediately soaking into my clothes. The city's neon glow was distorted by the sheets of rain, the usual cacophony of hums and buzzes replaced by a suffocating silence punctuated only by distant thunder. Mara caught up with me in a narrow alley, her sharp eyes scanning the darkness. "We need to move fast," she said, her voice steady despite the storm. "They're already jamming signals across the district." I nodded, the weight of the moment settling heavily on my shoulders. Every step away from my studio felt like leaving a part of myself behind. My sanctuary, my battleground, my prison. "They won't stop," I said, voice hoarse. "They want to erase everything." Mara's gaze hardened. "Then we'll have to be smarter. We find new ways. The static isn't just noise, it's the veil they fear. We can use it against them." Her determination was a lifeline, a flicker of light in the storm's endless night. Yet beneath it all, I could feel the creeping tendrils of paranoia wrapping tighter around my mind. The line between reality and hallucination blurred like the rain-slicked streets beneath our feet. As we vanished into the city's shadows, the oppressive static buzzed in my ears, a reminder that the fight was far from over. The silent authority had struck hard, but their grip was not absolute. Somewhere beyond the storm, the voices waited, and I would find a way to hear them again. But the question that haunted every step was clear: how long before the storm swallowed us all? The rain hammered down relentlessly, each drop a tiny drumbeat in a symphony of chaos. Above, lightning cracked the sky open, illuminating the city in jagged, fleeting bursts. In the distance, sirens wailed a dissonant chorus to the unfolding battle for truth and connection. I clenched the recorder tighter, its cold metal a fragile talisman against the encroaching silence. Mara's figure moved ahead with purpose, a beacon of defiance in the neon-soaked night. Together, we melted into the labyrinth of alleys and forgotten passageways, hunted yet unbroken. The static might have been their weapon, but it was also our message, a signal of resistance flickering stubbornly through the storm. And I was listening. The flickering glow of the monitors cast elongated shadows across the cramped corners of my studio, where the hum of static now felt less like background noise and more like a living presence. The voices at once fragile and insistent pierced through the white noise in splintered fragments. They were not words I could fully grasp, yet their emotional resonance was unmistakable. Desperation, longing, silent cries for salvation. Each night blurred into the next as sleep became a tenuous refuge. When I did drift into dreams, the city transformed into a fractured tableau of shimmering lights and pulsing storms. Ghostly silhouettes emerged from behind veils of static, their ethereal forms reaching toward me with mute sorrow. I woke gasping, the spectral impressions lingering in the hollowed spaces of my mind. Mara found me pacing the dim hallway outside my apartment one evening, my eyes wild, hands trembling as I replayed the latest recordings. "Elias," she said firmly, her sharp gaze cutting through the haze of my obsession. "You need to ground yourself. These voices, they're breaking through your mind, not just your equipment." Her words were a tether, but the pull of the broadcasts was relentless. I confided in Dr. Kalen Sato, whose pale frame hunched over his consoles amid a labyrinth of wires and screens. His voice was clinical, yet tinged with unease, as he explained the electromagnetic anomalies we were chasing. These liminal spaces, he said, are as much a trap for the mind as they are for the signals. You must guard your sanity as fiercely as your equipment. Despite the warnings, I plunged deeper. The broadcasts now carried stories, fragmented narratives of entrapment and silent suffering from a realm, parallel yet hauntingly close. The signals seeped into my waking hours, twisting perception, making shadows dance with unseen faces. The city's oppressive static was no longer mere noise. It was a veil hiding a tortured truth. As the boundary between what I heard and what I believed thinned, I wrestled with my own mind. Was I losing grip on reality, or was reality itself bending under the storm's influence? Mara's steady presence anchored me, even as my paranoia grew. Dr. Sato's scientific detachment offered frameworks but no comfort. Each distorted transmission was a shard of a greater puzzle, beckoning me toward a truth that terrified and compelled me in equal measure. The voices were more than echoes. They were reaching out, yearning for rescue from a prison woven of storms and static, a prison I was now determined to breach. But with every step forward, the shadows lengthened. The silent authorities' interference intensified, their cold, mechanical presence a reminder that some truths were meant to remain buried. As I navigated the labyrinth of signals and sanity, I realized that the greatest battle was not just to save the lost voices, but to preserve the fragile thread of my own mind. The static whispered on, carrying secrets I could no longer ignore, pulling me toward a precipice where the fragments of reality might shatter completely or coalesce into something new. I stood at the edge, listening, waiting for the next transmission, the next plea, the next glimpse into the unknown. And I knew, deep down, that turning back was no longer an option. The storm outside roared in celebration or warning, I could not tell which. But the voices were waiting, and I had to answer. The rain had just begun to taper off when I slipped through the narrow side alley. The familiar crackle of static in the air, mingling with the distant rumble of thunder still rolling across the city skyline. Neon signs flickered erratically above the puddle-speckled pavement, casting fractured glows that danced with the shadows clinging to the walls. I was late. Mara had warned me to be cautious, but curiosity gnawed at my thoughts, an itch I couldn't scratch until I met the man who knew the city's undercurrents better than anyone Jocks. The alley was a maze of forgotten passages, and I found him leaning against a rusted fire escape ladder, his leather jacket soaked and clinging to his wiry frame. A cap pulled low obscured most of his face, but his eyes were sharp, darting, always measuring. "You, Elias?" Jocks's voice was low, edged with suspicion. "I've been expecting you." "Yeah," I answered, trying to steady my breath. "You said you had information about the tech they're using, the silent authorities' gear." He nodded slowly, glancing over his shoulder before pulling me deeper into the maze of backstreets. "They've got their fingers everywhere. Signal jammers, drones, surveillance rigs, buried in the walls and sky. Not just to watch, but to silence." We ducked beneath a flickering neon sign advertising a long-closed bar, the electric hum blending with the ever-present static that seemed to pulse beneath the city's skin. Mara joined us a few steps behind, her sharp eyes scanning every shadow. "This place," Jocks whispered, "is just the tip. The authorities' grip runs deep, hiding in places most people don't dare to look." Our path led us to the city's subterranean network, tangled web of tunnels and forgotten service corridors, where the city's heartbeat slowed and the noise faded to a low throb. The air was thick with the scent of damp concrete and ozone, and the distant drip of water echoed like a metronome for our hurried steps. Mara's practical urban wear blended with the din surroundings as she pulled out a small flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness. "Stay close," she murmured. At one point, we passed a cluster of graffiti cryptic symbols overlaid with hastily scrawled warnings. It was a clandestine language of rebellion and fear, the city's silent screams etched in paint. Jocks led us to a hidden alcove where a dusty workbench sprawled beneath a flickering overhead bulb. On it lay an array of devices, signal jammers, transmitters, and surveillance equipment, abandoned but still ominously alive with faint blinking lights. I ran a trembling hand over a device shaped like a small box with antennae protruding like spindly legs. The sheer scale of the silent authorities' technological reach chilled me. This was more than surveillance. This was control, censorship, a chokehold on any possibility of connection beyond the static. They want to keep the voices buried, Jock said grimly. Anything that threatens their order gets snuffed out. Mara's gaze met mine, a silent understanding passing between us. We weren't just chasing whispers anymore. We were tangling with a force that would stop at nothing. Back out in the wet streets, the city seemed to pulse with renewed menace. I clutched the crude map Jocks had sketched, a chaotic web of safe houses, dead zones, and the locations of known authority installations. The static in the air seemed louder here, a living presence pressing in from every direction. "This is just the beginning," Mara said, her voice steady despite the tension. "We need to prepare." I nodded, the weight of what lay ahead settling deep in my chest. Somewhere beneath the electrical storms and the unending hum of static, the truth waited hidden, fragile, and dangerous. As we parted ways that night, the city's shadows grew longer. The storm clouds thickened, and the line between safety and peril blurred like the signals I chased. I knew that every step we took into the underworld of this city brought us closer to the heart of the mystery and to the watchful eyes of the silent authority. But I had to keep going, because the voices weren't just noise. They were cries for rescue, and I was the only one listening. The next days were a blur of whispered meetings and cautious exploration. Jocks became an indispensable guide, leading me and Mara through forgotten passages and hidden alcoves where the city's pulse beat beneath the surface. Each step revealed layers of a secret infrastructure designed to suppress and manipulate. One evening, as the city's neon glow flickered through rain-streaked windows, Mara and I examined the devices Jocks had procured. We found tampered receivers, hacked transmitters, and signal scramblers designed to jam frequencies like the ones I'd detected. The sophistication was staggering. This wasn't a ragtag operation, but a well-funded, deeply embedded system. "They've been at this for years," Mara said, her fingers tracing the circuitry on a jammer, "suppressing everything that threatens their narrative." I felt the familiar itch behind my eyes, the relentless urge to decode, to break through the veil. But the threat was no longer abstract. The silent authority's presence was a living shadow, stalking every corner of the city and our very minds. Our nights grew longer and more perilous. Surveillance drones buzzed overhead, their mechanical eyes probing for any sign of dissent. Agent Crow's shadow loomed closer, a constant reminder that our rebellion was as much psychological as it was physical. Yet, amidst the danger, the voices from the hidden frequency grew clearer, their pleas more desperate. They beckoned me deeper into the labyrinth of static and shadows, a siren call I could no longer resist. The city's underbelly had revealed its secrets, but the true battle was only beginning. Between the flickering neon lights and the ever-present hum of electrical storms, I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't alone. And whatever lay ahead, I had to face it, for the voices depended on it. As the rain began once more to fall softly over the cracked pavement, I readied myself to plunge further into the urban shadows, into the heart of the storm, where reality fractured and salvation waited just beyond the static. The streets were a tangle of wet reflections and muted sounds, each step echoing with the weight of what I'd learned. Mara's voice cut through the haze as we planned our next move, the city's oppressive atmosphere pressing close. "We need to find the nexus," she said, eyes sharp and unwavering. "Where the signals converge, where the boundary thins." I nodded, the lines between hope and fear blurring like the static that haunted my every thought. The silent authority was watching, waiting. But so was the truth, waiting to be uncovered beneath the urban shadows. And I was listening. The low hum of static filled my cramped studio, a constant companion since the city had succumbed to the unending electrical storms. The monitors flickered with waveforms, spectral fragments of a frequency I had been chasing relentlessly. Hours blurred into one another, the outside world dissolving beneath layers of static and data. Tonight, something was different. As the storm rumbled in the distance, a pattern emerged from the chaos, a rhythm pulsing in sync with the thunder, a heartbeat buried beneath the noise. I leaned closer, eyes scanning the cascade of numbers and audio waves. The broadcasts I had collected over weeks, each fragment a whisper from that other place, now aligned like pieces of a puzzle. They weren't random. They followed a pattern, a fragile signal threading through the storm's fury. My fingers trembled as I adjusted the filters, isolating the frequency that had haunted my nights. It pulsed steadily, a haunting thrum that seemed to echo the city's heartbeat. The studio's dim light cast long shadows, the clutter of cables and equipment around me feeling like a tangled web I was ensnared in. Outside, lightning split the sky, illuminating the jagged skyline. The city was a living organism, its storms both prison and key. Somewhere within that tempest was the liminal zone, the doorway between worlds I had only glimpsed through fractured signals. My thoughts drifted briefly to Mara. She had been my anchor, my voice of reason amid the growing chaos in my mind. But lately, her visits had become strained, her sharp eyes shadowed with worry. Our last conversation replayed in my mind, her words sharp but caring. "Elias, you're slipping away," she had said, frustration and fear tangled in her voice. "This obsession, it's consuming you." "I have to know, Mara," I had replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "If I don't, those voices will be lost forever." She shook her head, the weight of our growing distance crushing. I hated that my quest isolated me, but the pull of the unknown was too strong. Back at the monitors, I mapped the frequencies against the storm's cycles. The liminal zone wasn't just a theory. It was real, a fragile seam where reality thinned and the echoes of that trapped realm bled through. Each pulse of the frequency was a breath, a signal from beyond our world, begging for connection. The realization was electric, a mixture of awe and dread. What lay beyond the veil? Was it salvation or damnation? The deeper I tuned, the more the city seemed to warp around me. Static patterns shifted like living things, whispering secrets I could barely comprehend. Exhaustion tugged at my limbs, but sleep was a stranger. Instead, I climbed to the rooftop under the rain's cold kiss, the city sprawling beneath me like a circuit board alive with energy. Storms crackled, casting surreal light over the wet asphalt and glass towers. The liminal space was out there, somewhere in the heart of this storm-ravaged city, and I was its reluctant herald. I pressed my palm to the cold metal railing, grounding myself against the storm's fury and my own spiraling thoughts. The path ahead was dangerous, uncertain, but I couldn't turn back now. The voices depended on me. As lightning arced across the sky, illuminating the darkness, I whispered a silent vow to cross the threshold, to confront the unknown, and to bring the trapped souls back from the edge of silence. But at what cost? The city's static whispered answers I wasn't ready to hear. And in that moment, the line between reality and the broadcast blurred irrevocably, pulling me deeper into the storm's secret. I wasn't just chasing signals anymore. I was chasing a lifeline, and the storm was listening. The city was a tempest tonight, a living beast of crackling energy and relentless rain. Elias Vaughan adjusted the collar of his warm coat, the fabric soaked through, but no shield against the electric ferocity that raged overhead. Lightning tore the sky in jagged blue veins, illuminating the streets in stark, fleeting flashes. The static was louder here, as if the storm itself were a desperate broadcast, a scream trapped in electromagnetic waves swirling around the twisted cityscape. He clutched his handheld receiver tighter, the device a fragile lifeline amid the chaos. The hidden frequency pulsed erratically, a beacon threading through the storm's violent static. The voices came again, whispers barely audible over the thunder, fragile and urgent. "Help! Trapped! Don't forget us." Elias's breath hitched. They weren't just signals anymore. They were cries from a place stitched into the very fabric of the storm, a liminal realm where reality bled into something else. His footsteps splashed through puddles reflecting fractured neon signs, flickering advertisements that seemed to glitch like corrupted data. The city's usual hum was overwhelmed by the storm's roar, but beneath it, the voices persisted layered, overlapping, a chorus of silent suffering. He rounded a corner, heart pounding as the air thickened with electricity. Images flickered at the edge of his vision, ghostly overlays of shadowed buildings, unfamiliar yet hauntingly familiar. The boundary between worlds was thin here. He could feel it. "Elias, status." Mara's voice crackled urgently in his earpiece. "I'm close," he replied, voice tight. The storm's amplifying the signal. It's like the city's heartbeat, pulsing with another rhythm. "Be careful," she warned. "Crow's agents are closing in." The thought sharpened his senses. Somewhere in the rain-drenched maze, the cold presence of the silent authority lurked, their mechanical voices a sinister counterpoint to the storm's natural fury. Surveillance drones whirred overhead, nearly invisible against the dark clouds. Elias ducked into a narrow alley, the walls slick with rain and static-charged air. He raised his receiver, adjusting the dials, trying to filter the interference. The voices became clearer, fragmented phrases of despair and hope intertwined. "Don't let them silence us. Find the breach. Save us." His mind teetered on the edge of comprehension and madness. The storm's electric tendrils seemed to reach for him, pulling him deeper into a reality where time and space folded unpredictably. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed nearby. Elias spun, heart racing, catching a glimpse of a shadow slipping into the fog harbinger of the enforcers. He sprinted, rain lashing his face, static buzzing in his ears like a swarm of angry insects. "Elias, this way!" Mara's voice guided him to a hidden alcove where Dr. Sato waited, his pale face illuminated by the flickering stormlights. "The liminal space is destabilizing," Sato said grimly. "You're pushing the boundary too far. If it collapses here, both worlds could suffer irreparable damage." Elias shook his head, resolve hardening. "I have to know. I have to reach them." Together, they adjusted the equipment, trying to stabilize the frequency as the storm's fury crescendoed. Blue sparks danced along wires, syncing with the crackling energy overhead. The voices grew louder, more desperate. Elias closed his eyes, reaching out into the storm's heart. For a moment, the city fell silent, and he stood on the precipice of something vast and unknowable. Then, the world shattered into a kaleidoscope of sound and light, and Elias was no longer certain where he ended and the storm began. The chase was far from over. The silent authority would not relent. And at the storm's edge, the fragile boundary between salvation and oblivion trembled. As the thunder rolled and lightning danced, Elias faced the impossible, to bridge worlds or be consumed by the static forever. The storm was no longer just a backdrop. It was the battleground, and Elias was running out of time. The storm that night was relentless, the city swallowed in a cloak of rain and electrical fury that seemed to pulse with the static hum that had become our constant companion. Mara's voice crackled urgently over the encrypted comm, the sound distorted yet unmistakably tense. "They're coming, Elias. I barely got out. I lost them in the lower alleys, but it was close. Too close." My heart thudded in my chest, a frantic rhythm against the steady drone of the storm outside my window. I gripped the edge of my workstation. The cluttered array of monitors and